So thank you all for joining us. This is a preparation for our workshop that begins next week in Quito, where we're going to look at our program in the Andes Amazon and think about how we move forward with that in terms of the urgency and impact that we need to have in our programs. And I'd like to thank Grazi, who's here today to sort of take us through an introduction to systems thinking, and thank our supervisor for allowing us. And Grazi, you can introduce yourself. But Grazi used to be the marketing director in Brazil and joined us on a systems thinking training as part of the Mantiqueira Iconic Place team effort, and has moved to global communications position, but continues to be interested in the systems thinking and has given some systems thinking training for the Brazil team. So we're very pleased to have Grazi here to help us with this and share our understanding of the core elements, if you like, of systems thinking.
Yeah.
Grazi,
sure.
over to you.
Sure, Ian. Thanks for the invitation. Hi, everyone. I will do this training in English, but I completely understand Spanish, so feel free to ask questions in the end in Spanish if you prefer, but I won't put you all through my Spanish now. Let me try during the workshop. But as Ian briefly mentioned, I have been in TNC for, I don't know, I think 11 years, maybe 12, I don't know. It's passing by so fast. Worked 10 of those, what is this? Okay. Worked 10 of those 12 years with Brazil in the marketing department. And 2 years ago, I transitioned to still marketing, but the global digital team. I'm still trying to support whenever possible, Latin America and Brazil. And Ian invited me to share a little bit of what I've learned in that training with you all. So keep in mind that I'm still learning, but we have the opportunity to participate in an 8-month course with this guy in this little picture, which is Dave Stroh and Michael Goodman, which are amazing professors, thinkers of system thinking. And in that course, we attended with a team that was trying to apply system thinking for Mantiqueira, and I was part of that as the marketing lead in Brazil. Since I was still in Brazil, we have been talking about system thinking a lot. That's something that we started mentioning more, not only us, I think other NGOs, other companies, just because the challenges are so big that conventional thinking and just keeping doing business as usual might not be the way forward. But I also think there is opportunity to ground a little bit of what is system thinking? What do we mean when we talk about system thinking? Does this completely change what TNC does? This changed the project. And I think there's a lot of demystification to do around system thinking. So that's what I will try to do. There's a lot of content. Hopefully I will be able to go through all of that. If not, I might share a little bit of what we can see during the workshop. But let's try to go through as much content as possible. Let's try to ask questions in the end. Pam will help me with questions in the end. And Ian and Pam, also feel free to jump in if I miss anything. So let's start on that, if I can. Okay, so everyone can see my screen, correct?
Yes.
Yes. As I mentioned, with this 1-hour workshop, the idea is to understand at least a little bit of what is system thinking and how it promotes change, what it is different from other ways of thinking, stimulate a little bit the ability to think systemically, especially when we are talking about complex problems, and also introduce a 4-stage process to lead systemic change. That the four-stage process created by David Stroh, and that the process we applied in Mantiketa, and that we learned to apply the more contextual part of system thinking. Let's start with a little bit of humor. And when we see this charge, it seems extreme. It's funny, but it seems like this wouldn't happen. But it is a situation that I think we see a lot, even in our field environment. There's a lot of things that are happening, and maybe it's not so close to us right now that we can't see the impact. But the truth is, for a lot of those complex systems that we are involved in, the reality is whatever actions happen, it brings consequences, and those consequences can affect all the stakeholders within a system. So I'll start by sharing here some sample headlines. This could be headlines. These were actually headlines in the United States. And I want you to try to find out what's in common between those headlines. So, homeless shelters perpetuate homelessness. Drug busts increase drug-related crimes. Food banks contribute to food deserts. Get death prison sentence fail to reduce fear of violent crime. And job training programs increase unemployment. Any idea? Anyone want to try guessing what they have in common? I will then say that if you look closely, those headlines, all those actions are addressing symptoms versus the underlying problems. When you are taking people out of street, taking homeless out of street, you are not necessarily working to, in the homelessness situation, you are just taking what is visible from the whatever complex problem that's happening. They're kind of obvious, right? Obvious solutions, and they often succeed in short term. But in many of those cases, and that's what we see in the headlines, those short-term gains were undermined by long-term impacts. So whatever success we were able by placing people in shelters, we actually saw that increased homelessness. We also see that those negative consequences were unintentional. I'm pretty sure that whenever they tried to do any of those actions over there, they were not trying to get the problem worse, but that was one consequence of the action taken. And this is one of the most interests, and one I think it's pretty important for us to take a special look at. Whenever those problems recur, we do not see our responsibility on it. So if the problem was unintended, whoever applied that solution might not be seeing themselves as part of that problem and as responsible for what came next. Lewis Thomas was educator, doctor, poet, and he had this very interesting quote that whenever we are confronted by any complex social system with things that we are dissatisfied and that we are eager to change, we cannot just step in and try to change if you really want to change something. And he said that this is one of the sore discouragements of our time. And that's because if you really want to fix something, you are first obliged to understand the whole system. Whole system it's a lot. The systems that we face, we encounter, we work on, as part of TNC are very complex, but at least when you stop and you try to understand what that system is about, what you might not be seeing, you are able to understand the elements of the system and their interconnections. And that's where you can find leverages to really change and lead that system to the result you want to see. Is anyone familiar with this image? You can virtually raise your hand or an image, but this is a very interesting parable, Indian parable. And the parable talks about a village where there were only blind people, and they encountered an elephant for the first time. So they selected a group of people to go to that elephant and to learn what was an elephant and go back and tell the rest of the village. And those 5 people that were elected to go there, they went to the elephant in different sides of the elephant. And they started, the first one said, go back and said, an elephant is like a tree trunk. The other one were at the front part of the elephant, and they said an elephant is like a snake. The other was above the elephant, feeling just the fur, and said an elephant is like a brush. The fourth one was holding the tail of the elephant, and he said an elephant is like a rope. And the fifth one was the least lucky of all and was feeling something else on the floor and said that elephant is soft and mushy. In the end, no one really had a big picture of what the elephant is, and the village wasn't really able to understand the elephant. And that's what we say about seeing the whole, and that's what system thinking leads us to. It's just capturing that big picture, recognizing that we might be seeing different parts of the elephant. And by that, our judgment and our actions might be affected by the portion that we are seeing. I have been talking about system thinking, so I think it's important to stop here and do some definitions. What is a system? Donella Meadows, which is one of the biggest system, how can I say that? Thinkers, actually, system thinkers. It's a very well-known name within this field. She defines system as an interconnected set of elements that is coherently organized in a way that achieves something. It's funny how a very renowned thinker defined system using something. I don't know if you all feel the same, but it seems so vague to look at something in that sentence. But the truth is, it's absolutely intentional, because every system achieves something, and every system is designed to achieve that. You might have heard the system is broke, and that's not true. The system is achieving what it's designed to achieve. Even if that's not what we want them to achieve, it is designed to achieve that. And within a system, there might be stakeholders that are benefiting from what's currently achieving, and that might not be interested in changing. And that's something we need to realize whenever we think that the system is broke. We have to stop and think, is there someone that is benefiting from what the system is delivering right now? And system thinking is exactly that ability to understand those elements and that interconnection, such a way to achieve a desired purpose. When you are able to understand what elements form, what stakeholders are part of that systems, and how they are behaving between each other, you are able to try to search for I'm missing a lot of words today, but you are able to try to find leverages that will enable you to change the system to your desired purpose. Also, to clarify a little bit more on what is system thinking. System thinking, it's not something completely different from what we do. It's not a new concept. It's not something that someone just started talking about and now everyone replicates. It's something that we as human beings instinctively do already. I remember that David Stroh mentioned to us that it's almost like the way that child mind works, because when we become adults, when we enter in start working, we are drawn to really work and solve things in the conventional thinking, because we have time pressure. We need to deliver results fast. So we go to the conventional thinking, but system thinking, that looking at the whole and trying to understand the connection, is not something new. But the difference is, in conventional thinking, usually you see problems directly connected to causes. In system thinking, they're not obviously connected. We would talk a little bit more about that in a little while, but the conventional thinking is very linear, result chain, while system thinking, it's more circular. You understand that one action might have the desired reaction and other unintended consequences. Conventional thinking, if something's wrong, it's usually not my fault. You are usually putting the blame to other. While system thinking, you need to see yourself as part of the problem. You are part of the system, so you have responsibility, and you are also part of the problem. In conventional thinking, short-term success leads to long-term success. This is not true when we are seeing complex problems. Most of the quick fixes, they will either not do difference or they can make the problem worse. Conventional thinking, it's all about optimizing the parts. If you need to act fast, work on this, then go to the next one, the next one. While system thinking, it's about improving the relationship among the parts. And conventional thinking, do as much as you can, as quickly as you can. While system, it's focused on a few coordinated changes over time. And those changes are the ones that will really deliver the result that you are searching for. Let me just do a quick time check. We are good. So I think that the main takeaways when we are talking about system is our intentions, they may be good, but we have to understand that we are part of the problem. And because of that, we need to really take the time to appreciate and take a look at the problem to understand those connections. And you will only be able to do that if you really stop and take a look at the whole system. And this is not something achieved. I think it's the trickiest part. It's not something you can achieve very fast. You need to assess, you need to gather data. But of course, what you will not be able to really understand and cover all the system, but you have to understand those relationships and the stakeholders that are part of it. And the most important, I think, is systems are perfectly designed to deliver exactly what they are delivering. As long as we accept that to be true, it will be very unlikely that we can change the system, because our motivation to change might not be the motivation for everyone else that is part of the system. But this means that we will suddenly start using system thinking analysis for everything, and everything will take a million times because we will need to do a very thoughtful analysis. No, It's not for everything. There's a lot of problems that need to be solved with conventional thinking, but there are problems and issues that we see that are chronic. There were several attempts to solve it and they failed. It's a known history. There are a lot of perspectives involved. It's problems that we always have more to learn. And most importantly, we need to have some control or influence over it. We cannot try to solve a problem that we are not a part of the system, because eventually doesn't matter how you see that system if you are not part of it. And that was the first part and the more contextual part. Then after we sort of have this glimpse of all the depth within system thinking, David Stroh led us through the four steps process to really apply system thinking into social change. So that's what we will see a little bit now. And the first thing you have to do whenever you are applying system thinking to solving a problem is establishing what David called as the creative tension. You have your current reality. That's what you have right now. That's where you are. And you also have the mission and the vision, what you really want in the future. If that distance is your creative tension, it cannot be too far to stretch. If you think of a rubber band and you stretch it so much, it will break. But it can also not be flat. Otherwise, you don't have a lot to change or a lot of room to grow. So that's the creative tension. And that's the first thing you need to understand. You need to see where you are and where you want to go and frame your focusing question. So the focusing question will be your guiding question throughout all the deep diving that you will do on trying to solve that matter. The most interesting thing is you can never formulate your focusing question with why or, I'm sorry, no, with how to. You can never start with how to. Whenever you start with a question with how to, your first reaction is immediately to just answer. How to, TNC is not known in Brazil, and then you already start to try to give a lot of answers to try to solve that. So the first thing we learn, even to try to formulate the question, is to start with the words why or how come. There are some examples here, and you will see that by using why, you actually are bringing the question to another level, and your first reaction will be not probably to start solving. So some examples that were examples from the course we attended, and that there were groups there trying to solve those questions were, why are there persistent funding, visibility, and credibility gaps despite the evidence of results and significant potential when talking about Indigenous people and learning communities? There was a group focusing on staffing flexibility. So why are we not optimal deploying our staff to meet our organizational needs and priorities? There was also another group focused on climate change. And why is it difficult for TNC to mobilize political will for climate actions? And the most important, the reason why it is important to establish that creative tension is because even though you have a direction, you have to have everyone aligned. We cannot have everyone seeing that problem in different lens. You need to have a current reality and everyone is striking to reach that vision. Otherwise, it will be very difficult to change that system. The 4 stages to leading system change. The first one is building foundation for change. David called the first stage readiness, and we will go through each of them and what they mean. The second is understanding and acceptance. The third one, the second, facing current reality. So that's the stage that we will go very deep in trying to understand the current system. The number 3 is making an explicit choice, commitment. The 4th one is bridging the gap, focus, momentum, and correction. We will go through each of those just conceptually, but in the workshop, we will start this process with the groups attending, with everyone attending. Of course, we won't be able to go through all of this. The process we did in Mantiqueira, the course overall took 8 months. Not necessarily you can only apply in 8 months, but we will start it, but there will be some next steps, which will follow these stages. The first one, building the foundation. The first thing I already mentioned would be establishing the creative tension. The second, and something that we often do way late in the process, is actually engaging stakeholders, including end users. This is very important because many times we do the complete process by ourselves, and in the end, we just go to the stakeholder and ask for buy-in. But if we consider that we don't see everything the same way, whatever we are asking for buy-in might be something that stakeholder doesn't believe. And the third one, build collaborative capacity. One tool that we will use, especially for engaging stakeholders, is this stakeholder analysis worksheet. I know that everyone has seen and done stakeholder analysis. This is not something unique to this methodology, and there are many methodology, but there's an extra thing which I think is very valuable in the way that system thinking, at least David Stroh applied this methodology, which is around the motivations. What are the motivations for change? This is very important, and oftentimes I would say not taken care or not paid attention as it would be necessary. So in the workshop, we will be able to apply stakeholder analysis and hopefully try to understand a little bit more of the motivations behind our system. The second stage, and I think that this was probably the stage that took us more time, is facing current reality. It starts with gathering systemic data. I will talk a little bit about the methodology that we use to gather that data. Then it goes to develop a system analysis to answer why, and build support by bringing the system to life. Talking about gathering systemic data, we use the Iceberg. Again, not a new tool, not necessarily a unique tool, but a very, very powerful tool to gather data. And the way that there are several ways of using the Iceberg as a tool. The way that we see it is, if you look at the top, the very top of the iceberg, you will see the events. So what's getting our attention and concern? So if we are talking about water, we are seeing floods, we are seeing dries, we are seeing less rain, a lot of events that are catching our attention. If we go a little down in the iceberg, but it's still under the surface, what's been happening historically? What are the trends and patterns that we can see that are consistent with those events? We are seeing a lot of deforestation. We are seeing a lot of urban development. All of that must be altering. We are seeing climate change. But if you go a little down in the structure, what are the forces and pressures that are maintaining this system as it is, maintaining those events? What has been happening, what's generating, and what's perpetuating it? What I love about applying the iceberg the most, it's actually the lower piece. And I think the most ignored one, or it's not ignored, but sometimes it may be underrepresented, at least its importance, which are the mental models. What are the beliefs, the values, and all the assumptions beneath all of that that's perpetuating all that we see above? I have a very, very, very simple example here, but that I think it's so helpful to understand the power of the iceberg. So the event is catching a cold. Something simple. We have been catching a cold. What are the trends and patterns? I have been catching more colds. I have been sleeping less. What's even below? I have more stress at work. I'm not eating well. I have difficulty getting healthy food. I spend long hours at work. And I'm sorry, the presentation is moving itself. So let me see if it stopped. And I'm finding hard to unwind or disconnect. But very, very beneath the bottom of the iceberg, I actually believe that my career defines my identity. I also think that healthy food is too expensive, so I don't even look at it. And I also think that rest is for the unmotivated. So if I catch a cold and I just take a medicine, I will get better, but I will get another cold and another cold and another cold, unless that I really go beneath the surface to in this case, to my own beliefs and change that so I can change everything that's above. This is not easy. Changing beliefs, it's never easy. But changing mental models, but if this is ignored, you might not never solve whatever you are trying beneath, because mental models hold a very big power. The second step of the facing current reality, understanding and acceptance, is developing a system analysis to answer why. I mentioned that I was going to talk a little bit more about, but in many of the problem solving we try to do, we represent the problem in a linear system. Results chain could be a way that we do this, but it's very often that when we are trying to represent a problem and a solution, we do that in a circular way. The system thinking methodology does not believe, like I said, that problems or crises lead directly into actions and interventions. And the system thinking language actually proposes a switch from this to problems or crisis leads to actions or intervention, which leads back to unintended and delayed consequences. So just by seeing the world as a circular, not linear, you open room to some forces that might not be represented in our current conventional system problem solving. And when we talk about building support by bringing the system to life, this is the most challenging part of the presentation, because points 2 and 3, for us, we went through the whole language and methodology to really be able to design or represent visually a system. And we won't be able to do this here, nor am I equipped to teach you all how to do this. But when we talk about building, bringing the system to life, I want to give an example here. One example that was a real case that David worked in US with a US county, and it was related to temporary shelters. So the problem they were facing was homelessness. There was a lot of homeless people within that county, and what they did is whenever the number of homeless people grew, they also grew the number of temporary shelters and supports. And that was a quick fix, because I'm sure they knew that that's not solving the core of the problem. They were smart people. They have public sector NGOs. They had all types of people together trying to solve this. So they knew that this was not the real fix. The fundamental solution was actually permanent housing and critical services, because whenever the number of homeless increases, they increased as well the permanent housing programs that would eventually, and that's what those two traces there means, with the delay, eventually they would decrease the number of people at the streets. But what they didn't know, or what they were not necessarily being accountable for, is whenever they increase the number of temporary shelters, the problem visibility actually decreased, and the pressure to make fundamental shifts also decreased, because it was not over the news. So people are not necessarily paying attention. And by doing that, and that became, I'm sorry, let me go back here. And by doing that, you were actually increasing the number of homeless, because you were taking the pressure of a permanent solution, and you were not focusing on the true problem. And that actually became a vicious cycle. On the other side, when you increase the number of temporary shelters, you also decrease the funding you increase the funding to individual organizations, because that raises the pressure on donor for short-term results. And by increasing that funding to individual organizations, you are decreasing the willingness, time, and funding to innovate and collaborate in an actual solution, permanent solution, which is decreasing, again, the permanent housing critical services, which will, again, impact in the number of homelessness. So that's a second vicious cycle. And what I think it's really important also to show here is that this is where the mental models are part of the system, because I'm sorry, when I look at here, it's just because everyone's pictures is occupying a portion of my screen. So it might be the best practice, but it is too hard. It takes too long, and it is too expensive. Or services providers, we have to protect our own funding. Or donors, our board expect results now. So it's not, I see, Jackie, your hand raised, just 1 second. So it's not that all of the smart people working in this issue didn't know that the temporary shelters were just a quick fix. What I think they were not aware, or at least not fully intentional doing, is by doing that, they were actually increasing the problem. So just laying down the system and seeing where each forces is actually impacting gave them the power to see that even if it's a quick fix, it might not be the best to really reach our goals. Jackie?
Now, you answered the question when you were explaining, which is even the donors became part of the problem because of the pressure to get quick results. But you answered when you put the third bubble. Thank you.
And I would say, Jackie, that maybe the donors were actually like the biggest driver, and maybe they were more willing to fund a quick fix than the permanent solution, because that would bring a very quick reaction, people out of streets. So yes, they're a very big part of the problem.
They wanted to see their streets clean more than resolving the problem of the homeless people.
Yes, exactly. So this is what we saw in that example, actually. Unforeseen consequences impacting the system in a way that they were not expecting. I'm sure that that very nice gentleman pushing that side didn't know that that would come back to him.
And sometimes how the interests of the donors are conflicting with the solution of the problem, right?
Yes, because they have their own interests, and they maybe that they're being benefited somehow for the way that system works. And another thing that I won't be able to really go deep on, but I think it's worth mentioning, there's something called system archetypes. And by the combination of different types of loops, which are those circles, they fit into what we call some system archetypes. I will come back to this slide in a second, but if you take a look at this archetype, which is called shifting the burden, that's exactly the homeless system that I just walked through with you. And just like the homelessness problem, there are several other problems that could fit into this exactly archetype. So in this case, there's a problem, a symptom, or a pressure. A quick fix is being applied, and that quick fix is bringing a side effect that is impacting the long-term solution. And this specific archetype is mental models are very strong in maintaining it as it is, because when you apply the quick fix, you do this because it's the most humane thing to do to take people out of street. And you don't do the permanent solution because it takes too much time. So by understanding that the problems actually have an overlaying structure, might be similar to other, you are able to find, recognize where you can find your leverages. So this is very, I'm going back a little bit. This is very interesting to see. And there are several archetypes, just like that one, shifting the burden. There is the fixes that backfire. And when you start to work on your problem, you might recognize forces that are very similar to one of those archetypes, which makes easier for you to draw the system, understand it, and try to search whatever leverage you can. Let me go past this and going to stage 3, and this I will go very fast, stage 3 and 4. Only in the stage 3, you actually, you have built a system. So in that example of the homelessness, that was a product that was prepared after the Iceberg, after stakeholder analysis, stakeholder interview, and you are able to have a picture of your system. And with that, you are able to reach back to stakeholders. You are able to recognize what are your pinpoints and what are your leverages that you want to push. And you are able to actually make a choice, choose what pinpoints you will work on. Like we said, systems are so complex. The biggest challenge when working with those complex problems using system thinking is new what's the word? Not new problems, new parts will always come up, and you have difficult time trying to understand, is this a key part of what I'm trying to solve within that system or no. So in the stage 3, that's where you truly make the commitment. While the only in the stage 4 that you will actually start talking about solution. And look at everything we did before developing even one strategy. So it's only in stage 4 that you will look at that system and you will try to identify leverage points. What are the things that I can change in this system to achieve what I'm trying to achieve? It's within the 4th stage that you will actually develop your systemic theory of change, which is actually describing what it is that you are proposing to do with that system to change. In that example of the homelessness, probably they decided to really invest on the fundamental solution and probably propose something different for the quick fix. This doesn't mean that to incorporate system thinking within our work, we need to review everything. A lot of what we do takes into account systemic thinking. But this presentation and this content is a lot more to think, is there anything that we are not doing? Are we missing anything? The solutions, the strategies that we are currently deploying will ultimately reach our fundamental goal. Are we really solving the fundamental problem by applying this solution? So I think that's where we will probably go through in our workshop. That's the end of what I wanted to share, but Pam, Ian, Jackie participated in the previous one. Francisca, feel free to add. I added here just some books for those that are interested in system thinking. It's extensive. There are several methodologies. The one that we are using with this workshop work is the 4th book, which is the System Thinking for Social Change from David Stroh. But there is even a link here for those that are interested in learning more. Let me stop here in my final slide and invite Ian or questions. And I haven't seen the chat, so if someone can help me facilitate, I haven't seen anything that is going on. And I can't open the chat for some reason, so I'll stop trying.
Thanks a lot, Grazi. That's really good within the time constraints that you have. I think that's really helpful. And I hope it has been to others. Obviously, I did the course with Grazi, and so I'm being reminded of some of the things that I was supposed to have learned before. But yeah, we're open to questions and you know, opinions, reactions, and yeah, we've got about 10 minutes, well, just less than 10 minutes. So please, if anyone has any comment or question.
I just want to thank you, Grazi, because I think that this is a very, it's complex, but it has enough of the concepts and the overarching understanding of what the approach is, and then it gets grounded with some concrete examples. And I think that helps. That's really, really helpful. It helps people understand, translate it into something that's more tangible. So I think for a quick introduction, for starting to get people aligned around that, I think that is really good. I do think, though, that we need to think more as we think about unpacking this with a broad team, about having like a very simple language or grammar or some concepts, right, that we can pull out, that we can have, so that we make sure that in the future, you know, the team as such is referring to these processes or to these components, these elements in the same way. But I think this is very very straightforward, and very streamlined, which is quite remarkable given how complicated this all is. So thank you for that. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Paula. And indeed, it's complex, and to apply it, it's complex and takes time. So the idea was just to share and perhaps start making our heads first understand what do we mean when we talk about system thinking, and also start giving a new lens for folks to take a look at problems. Thank you. Yes, I can share the presentation, Marco. I will close this, and perhaps I can share with you to make available to everyone that attended.
Grazi, one of the things, the comments that I made in the last training, which was very good, by the way, you even took it to another level. Thank you. But I think one of the things that I realized, I'm being totally new to systems change, is that sometimes it's a way of working and not finding exactly what the solution is, like thinking about how am I going to fix this, the palliative care, is really finding how can I fix the problem from the beginning, from the root of it. And that's a different way of looking at things overall, but it's not only within TNC. What I realized in this one, which I didn't realize, and the other one is also outside of TNC, because I probably didn't pay enough attention when you talked about the donors last time. So to me, that was very good the last time, and this is even better. Thank you.
Thank you, Jackie.
Thank you, Graciel. I really appreciate your presentation. As I was telling you before, I heard the one that you presented in Portuguese. It was amazing, and I agree with Jackie that you made an upgrade for this presentation. So thank you for that effort. And I think that from listening to you twice, it comes to me that we see the donors, we see the external stakeholders, we see all the others. But then when we look to ourselves, I think we need also to think about our mental models. What are our difficulties to lead and to, take this process to a different level? And I would love to hear from this team. I know that Rodrigo, Pam, Ian, yourself, Graciela, and everyone here has been in a certain way working, and I would love to, in a certain moment, have a conversation about that. What are our mental models that are difficulting, are, the big step? What are, what the changes that we need to do with ourselves?
Mm-hmm. In the course that I took with We Are Co-Creative, it starts with the leadership. It starts with the leadership having that mental model, practicing this, and even looking at other parts, like Rodrigo was saying, other parts of our system, our internal system that makes it difficult for us to do that type of work. That's what I learned in the other training.
I think, sorry, just on the positive side, I think because we are a part of the problem, that means that we have more ability to make a change. That's the very positive thing for me, about systems, is that in a sense it empowers us because we're a critical part of the problem and we can address those elements. Mm-hmm. So I see it as empowering in the end of the day, although it's complex. Sorry, Rodrigo.
And difficult as well.
Yeah,
it was the most challenging.
I think that one difficulty I experienced. First, thank you, Grazi. Excellent as always, as the one you presenting the water strategy as well. Yeah, evolving all the time. Two things. I think that what I see time to time is that understanding the real problem is key, because sometimes we and connect to the problem is what is the vision we have for that, because that influences directly on how engaged we are in the change and going deep or not in the problem that we want to solve or want to address. And the other one is that I wrote in the chat, I think that we also need to look inside, because sometimes we are struggling with our own structure and our own process and beliefs and things like that. So having a system approach is for the both directions. Externally in our projects, internally in our structure as well. And that sometimes, one last comment, I'm sorry. Sometimes when we fundraise and when we present proposals or ideas, we go with a full package of all the solutions and deliverables, and everything is so very well planned that it's sometimes difficult to innovate with that. So if you don't insert that in the conservation planning process or with projects and proposals, it's not easy to really, okay, how to pivot when something is not going well, how to innovate and change the direction. If sometimes donors and even ourselves, we do all the planning process from the beginning to the end and everything is very fixed, and it's hard to start thinking and planning differently internally as well.
Yeah, and just building on what you're saying, Rodrigo, why it's very important to get everybody aligned around this is because it changes the risk reward profile, but it also initially really has to change the risk appetite. And a lot of that shift is something that is very scary, and we need people to come on board. The other is because this really calls for prioritizing, because you cannot do this if you're doing 1,000 little bits and pieces of projects.
Mhm.
And so we have the situation where a lot of teams want to hang on to, but we've been working here for 10 years. Oh, we have this partner. And you don't really want to let go because you've invested, but it's not going to go anywhere. You can stay there for another 10 years and nothing's going to happen. And getting people to understand the potential here and why you have to have enough bandwidth to do this is going to be really important to help us get the teams to prioritize and to really think about where we can have the deeper impact. But that shift in the mindset this is fundamental to get people to let go and have, one, that risk appetite, and two, that broader vision. And so that's why it's really important that we have a common language and a common grammar to talk about this, so that we don't have to, because this is so also complicated. It's going to be a really huge challenge in the years ahead, that we don't waste extra time and there's not extra noise in the system of trying to re-explain and remind people of what it is that we're trying to do and why we're trying to do it, that we start, because then the doing is, it's so hard. So the more that we can get at least the core, and I don't mean core leadership, those of us on this call, even beyond us, right, into sort of mid-level levels of leadership across all of the projects and the programs aligned, so that they can also be thought leaders in this. And that's why this is very foundational. It's a huge shift for all of us, and it's going to take years.
Yeah, so I think once again, thank you, Grazi, for that. And our time has come to an end. We look forward to next week for those of you that are going to be with us in Quito, and again, learning from that. And we'll be going over some of this material again and doing some hands-on work. But the other thing I would say is that I agree fully, Paolo, with what you said. But on the other hand, I think we've learned that we are an organization that has ambition. And we are an organization, that has been thinking about how we get to scale. And so we have to appreciate where we are, but be willing to look and see, do we really understand the roots of the problem? And have we really taken the time to understand the system? And then to see which parts of it we continue and which parts of it we drop. I think that, for me, is the change management component of this. But again, I hope that next week, in terms of the NDN, I'm saying that's the process we'll come through together. So looking forward to it very much. And thank you all for your attention and interest.
Thank you all.
Thank you so much.
Obrigada, Grazi.
Thanks, everybody.
See you all.
Goodbye.
Bye-bye.
Tchau, tchau. Obrigado, pessoal.
Tchau, tchau.
Até semana que vem.